You've made your offer, it's been accepted, the contracts are signed and the initial deposit's been paid. So now what happens? Well, let's break it down. Hello, and welcome to First Home Unlocked, the podcast for unlocking clarity and confidence for first home buyers. I'm Jack Elliott, National First Home Buyer Specialist at Alcove.
And I'm Chris Bates, ex-financial planner and mortgage broker.
Together, we are on a mission to empower you with the keys to unlock your first home. Let's jump in. Hello and welcome back to First Home Unlocked. How are you today, Chris?
Doing well, Jack. I mean, it's episode number 8 today, but you usually put a few in the piggy bank before you go live, and we had live this week, so that was super exciting. And yeah, it's good. I've been wanting to do this podcast for years, and doing it with you is awesome. So yeah, doing well. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, Chris. And yeah, as you mentioned, we actually launched this week, so it was really exciting to see the podcast go live and hear lots of feedback from first home buyers and how this is going to help them over their journey. So yeah, all that work that we've been doing in the background is finally out there. And yeah, it's been a really exciting week. We've also had a lot of movement in the middle of winter here, had a couple of first home buyers purchase over the weekend. So had a client purchase in Melbourne, nice little unit, and then also another first home buyer client purchase up in Queensland. Why I mentioned that is today is our last episode in the buying process. So over the last 7 episodes, we've taken you through every step of the home buying journey. And today's step 8 is from formal approval to settlement. So them clients that I mentioned that purchased, they'll be going through these stages as well. So I think it's a great place to go through and understand how this last part of your home buying journey works. So if you are tuning in just now to this episode, we recommend you starting back at episode 1 and working your way through the full home buying process series, because every step builds on the last, and this final episode brings it all together, getting your first home. So what we'll unpack today. So we're going to unpack what happens after your offer is accepted and your contracts have been signed, the role of your broker and conveyancer from formal to settlement. We'll compare the formal process with a pre-approved buyer versus a non-pre-approved buyer and how that looks different, and what you as the buyer needs to do to get ready for settlement. And then we'll finish off this episode with what actually happens on settlement day, on that day that you get the keys to your first home. Let's start with, you've made your offer, it's been accepted, the contracts are signed and the initial deposit's been paid. So now what happens? Well, let's break it down. You'll need to send the fully signed contract to your mortgage broker as soon as possible. So once your broker receives the contract, they'll confirm your final borrowing position based on the final sale price. They'll double check that the lender that you're pre-approved with is still the best option and let you know of that. And then your broker will also order a valuation on the property. Now, this is a key part of getting formal approval, because we can't order valuations as a broker until we have the fully signed contract. Now, the valuation is a really important part of the bank's formal approval. It's how they can confirm they're comfortable lending to that specific property. So think of it this way. If for some reason you couldn't repay the loan and the bank had to step in and sell that property, they need to know that they're able to recover what they've lent you. So the valuation, it isn't just about gauging what the market's doing. It's also about the lender managing their risks. So there's 2 types of valuations that lenders use. The first type is an in-person valuation. So this is when a licensed valuer physically attends the property and completes a full inspection. So this is common for purchases. The second type is a desktop valuation. Now, this is when the valuer assesses the property using online tools and recent sale data. So they don't actually physically visit the property, and it's more common on refinances. So most lenders will still prefer that in-person valuation for purchases, as I mentioned. And once the valuer visits the home, it usually takes around 24 to 48 hours to receive the valuation report. So this includes the lender's value estimate, basic details of the building, so the age, the layout, the condition. It'll have the land information, so the size, the zoning, the site boundaries, and it'll also have some comments on the property and any required repairs. So once this report is back, it's passed to your lender to finish the final checks and issue that formal approval. So Chris, it's not something we see often, but have you seen a valuation come in lower than a contract price?
Look, you've said a lot of good content here already, Jack. My sort of take at this stage of the process, before we just answer that question, Jack, is that It can be to catch clients by surprise. It can become quite stressful when it doesn't need to be. I think you've made a real good point here is that, when you do buy, you got a fully signed contract and yeah, you can pop the champagne, knowing that no one else can come in and gazump you. But don't sort of waste that opportunity by just jumping on the front foot, because even if you've got 60 days or it's a really short settlement, absolutely you need to be on the front foot. But you just want to get that peace of mind that you get formal approval at a bank. Then you feel really comfortable, because we'll talk about that later in the episode, but the process is really simple after that. But yeah, don't just sort of rest on your laurels. The benefit of doing that as well is that sometimes it gives the broker more time to shop the market and go, oh, actually, yeah, you've only purchased on the weekend. It's Monday. You got 60 days. Hey, we could save 10 basis points if we lodged an application with so-and-so. Maybe we should do that. But if you get it to us a week or two later, that fear of going elsewhere actually increases. And so that's a really good point. Your point around valuations, it is something that conveyancers can really scare first home buyers on, I feel. And if they don't understand really the mortgage process, because a lot of conveyancers say, don't sign the contract unless you've got unconditional loan approval, which just is impossible to get unless you've had a valuation. And you can't order a valuation until you've got a sale contract. So just be really mindful of that. There is a lot of people fearful around valuations. The reality is you've got to think about it from a bank's point of view. They want to lend you the money. They don't want you to go somewhere else and borrow the money. And so valuations 99.9% of the time isn't an issue when you're buying properties under private sale or through auctions. They can be an issue if you're buying off the plan, but that's a whole other story, which we can do an episode on, because that's not today you're buying it. You sort of bought it 2 years ago, and it really depends on today's valuation, not what you purchased it for a couple of years ago. Interesting, the banks are actually shifting more and more to these desktop vals, and that doesn't mean that they're using RP data. So that doesn't mean they're just using RP data or software and basing it based on that. The bank basically wants to value it at what you purchased it at. They don't want to value it low, because then they know that's going to create you all sorts of issues. They basically just want to do is, have you paid a fair price? Is there just a few comparables around that price point? Yes, then they move on. If they use a value a company and they go round to the property, that person probably gets paid about $100. Maybe a couple $100 goes to the firm, and maybe that person themselves gets paid $50, $100. You got to think about how much time they want to spend at the property if they're getting paid that amount. So often they'll go in, do a quick few photos, measure any rooms that don't make sense, or making sure that it all matches what the contract is and what the floor plans are. Make sure there's nothing majorly wrong with the property. And then if that what you paid is around what other properties are selling for, they don't really go through with a fine-tooth comb and say, you should have paid $922,000 and you paid $900, you got a bargain, or you paid $950 and it's only worth $922. If they think it's worth more than what you paid, that highly likely they won't value it at that price, because you ended up buying it at that price. So that's the market price. So you don't really need to be too concerned about valuations. However, where we've seen it go wrong, which was sort of your question, Jack, is very few scenarios. Where it has gone wrong is when a property is very rare and very little comparables, and someone's paid a big price for a property and it's very hard to get a comparable property. So it's either at the premium end of the market, or maybe it's regionally. Maybe it's sort of a really big block, or maybe an expensive build, a really expensive build, and it's really hard to justify that price. But if you're buying a sort of bog standard, just a house in a suburb or a townhouse or an apartment, you've usually got not that much scarcity there, and there's usually some comparable properties. The only other times I've seen it go wrong is when someone has just got way too confident. They've bought something pre-auction and they've put a really big price down, and they've really just massively overpaid. That's very rare. I've seen that happen, because why would someone want to massively overpay? And that client, actually ended up cooling off in that scenario. And we haven't really seen it many more times than that. And that's, considering we've, settled over $2 billion home loans, you'd think you would have seen it a lot and would have heaps of examples. We don't. And that just shows that it's very rare that it happens.
Exactly right. It's not a common scenario. We rarely see it. And this is where talking with your broker and working with your broker closely, we're able to help guide you through this valuation process and, give you that backing and that confidence with the property that you've purchased as well. So moving on to the formal approval stage. So once that valuation has been completed, the lender will do that final check of your application before giving that formal approval. This timing can vary. Sometimes it's as quick as a couple of hours. Other times it can take a few business days. This just depends on the lender's workload and what that assessor that's assessing your file has on their workload. Now, when the formal approval comes through, your broker will call you to congratulate you. Now, Chris, these are some of my favorite calls to make. It's such a big moment for first home buyers, and I just love being a part of it. As you mentioned, this is the part where you can pop the champagne. You've got that formal approval, but it's all about then getting prepared for these next steps for settlement. So I wanted to break down a scenario here, a pre-approved client versus a non-pre-approved client, and how the formal process would look different. Client A, let's take them for example. They're pre-approved, ready, and they've got a 7-day finance clause. This client got pre-approval early, had their conveyancer organised. They're obviously a first home unlocked listener. When they found the right property, they were able to submit an offer confidently. And because they are pre-approved, after contract signing, the formal approval process kicked off straight away. So their valuation was ordered that day and the formal approval came through 48 hours after. So that means that formal approval was issued within 3 business days of them signing the contract. And the result of this, a clear, calm and confident purchase experience. Let's take another example. Client B, they have no pre-approval organised and they also have that 7-day finance clause. So this client skipped the pre-approval step, assuming they'd figure it out after their offer was accepted. Now, after their offer was accepted, they had to work with their broker to start the application from scratch. So they had to pull together all their loan documents, break down the servicing with their broker and look at all the lender options and then get application forms organised. So then they had to wait for the lender to review everything and the bank needed some updated information, which took extra time to process. So the finance clause date was missed and they had to request an extension, which you can do, and that was requested by the buyer, which caused a lot of stress. And they got that formal approval a day after the original finance clause, and they were now able to get ready for settlement. So the result of this was a stressful and risky process that could have been avoided with that upfront planning. So I just want to be clear with these 2 examples. If you're listening to this and you've made an offer and you haven't got pre-approved, don't panic, because we can still definitely help you out. We'll do our best to get everything moving as quick as possible and get sorted in time. It's just not as smooth as a process and it can be more stressful compared to if you were pre-approved. So Chris, how can a situation like this change the way that someone remembers their first home experience?
Look, you're sort of stoking some scenarios that are in my mind of clients over the years. And yeah, you'd be surprised how many we've had over the years that have come to us without pre-approval and they've bought their first place. Some are no issues. Often that's the case. The people who are the most confident are the ones who are out there buying. They know they've got the job. They know they're buying quite conservatively. They know they've got the deposit. They know there's nothing wrong with their credit file. And so, yeah, having pre-approval was maybe a formality anyway. I still would have recommended and would have been less stressful for us and them to know that. But absolutely, there's clients who have come who didn't know they had an issue with their credit file. And those issues can sometimes take months to fix, even if it's not your fault. And someone maybe had identity theft or they've missed a repayment. It was an old credit card or something like that. And so, yeah, definitely getting pre-approval will reduce that stress. I would say, though, if you are in a position and you are on the back foot a little bit, just be really careful trying to go direct to banks yourself. Or maybe this is just one of the challenges I think new to industry brokers have is, they know a couple of banks quite well, but they don't know the full market and they just don't know, because you just don't want to become in this mud on the wall approach. Your credit application, if there is something a bit quirky with it, maybe it's the way you earn income, or maybe it's you've got to go into LMI, or maybe it's quite pushing your servicing. You just don't want to basically lodge applications and get multiple decline loans. It just really affects your credit rating, but it just gives you as an applicant a bad smell. And so what we really do at those situations is pause, really understand their situation, really speak to BDMs, really make sure this is going to get approved by the banks before we lodge, because we don't want to not get it approved. And that's just something I think you learn over years after being a broker, that, there's no point lodging it unless you know it's going to get approved. And early days, I think a lot of brokers just try their luck. And that makes it even more stressful, because when you're in a tight time frame, if you waste any time chasing the wrong rabbit, going down the wrong path, then you can really make it even more stressful because you've really cut into your time.
The main point that you're raising there, Chris, is getting prepared early. And we've talked about that throughout the whole home buying process, is doing these steps early, talking to your broker early so you can get prepared and we can find out if there's any red flags on your credit file, like you mentioned. So just getting prepared early, having them early conversations, that will hold you in good stead for this kind of formal approval when you're making offers. So let's move on. So when you've received that formal approval letter, here's what happens next and who is involved at each step. So step 1 is you need to sign your loan documents and set up your bank account. So your lender will send you through your official loan documents to sign, and you'll need to set up your new bank accounts and any offset accounts that you have, and then you can complete and sign your loan documents. Step 2, your broker will give you a summary showing how much of your own money you still need to pay at settlement, and this is often called the shortfall. So for example, you need to pay a $70,000 deposit overall for your property. You've paid $20,000 deposit after signing your contract. Now the shortfall for settlement will be that remaining $50,000 of your total deposit. So step 3 is you need to organise your building insurance certificate. So lenders require a valid building insurance certificate before settlement. And here's what you need to do. Organise insurance that starts on the date of settlement or even a few days before, and make sure the lender is listed as the interested party on the certificate. Otherwise, the bank won't accept it. And the final step, step 4, is the PEXA settlement workspace is set up. Now, this step happens in the background, but it's crucial for settlement. So this will be handled by a conveyancer, and they will set up your PEXA settlement workspace, which is just the digital platform used to transfer the property ownership into your name and complete the settlement. So they'll collaborate with your lender and your broker to make sure all the documents and funds are correctly loaded and in the right place, and they'll coordinate with the seller's legal team to ensure everything lines up. So once everything is in place, your broker will let you know when settlement is booked and what time it's expected to take place on that date. So Chris, from your experience, what makes a smooth preparation for settlement?
Basically getting your formal approval as early as possible is probably the first thing. Then also staying really close with your conveyancer just to really understand how that process works. I'd rather get in there early, and they love it, to be honest. I think that would be the first thing. Your building insurance, I do think is maybe even you can do that a little bit earlier. Sometimes a lot of these building insurers will provide it as soon as you sign the contract, and often that's not a bad move. Because there is a bit of a who owns this property after you've signed the contract. And yeah, just stay in touch with your conveyancer. The conveyancer will, if they've got a real good line of communication with you and know that you've got all your formal loan and know what bank you're working with, that'll make you feel really comfortable because they'll know there's no issues. Conveyancers often know if they get late, they do start to freak out because they're usually managing many settlements per week and sometimes multiple per day. If things aren't, a few days out, they start getting a bit stressed and they bring that stress onto you as a buyer. Often it's just sometimes the case that it's all getting wrapped up in the last few days. So the earlier you get it better, everyone stays calm and collected.
And I think as well, Chris, a really key important part, you've talked about your conveyancer, but also getting your broker and conveyancer to be talking at this stage as well is really important. Having both your broker and conveyancer on the same team, communicating, keeping each other updated, it just means all this work gets done in the background and then you know that you're safe, you're ready to go for settlement and they can handle all of that as well. Now, settlement day, what actually happens on settlement day? So settlement day is the final step in your journey. It's when the property officially becomes yours. So here's what to expect on the day. On the day itself, you don't usually need to do anything. Your conveyancer and broker will handle it and let you know when settlement's complete. And you'll be able to collect the keys from the real estate agent. You can organise that with them directly. Now, it is a good idea to keep your phone handy in case your broker and conveyancer need to reach you for anything. And once that's been completed, you're now officially own your first home. Chris, before we wrap up today, is there anything that you want to add?
Oh, no, I think it's been a great episode, Jack, and you've really covered it. It doesn't need to be stressful, this part. The most stressful part also isn't getting the pre-approval and getting the formal loan approval. Great brokers will know that everything's going to be a formality, and sometimes it takes longer. And, and if there is any concerns, they will tell you those concerns very early on and have a plan B up their sleeve as well. So the most stressful part's actually finding the asset. And I think often a lot of people find these other parts just as stressful just because they haven't got prepared. And maybe they're just maybe sat on their hands. There's always this final, emotional signed a contract. And then we often sometimes hear from clients a week later after their purchase and say, oh yeah, I purchased this last week. It's like, yeah, great. Thank you. Congrats. Maybe it would have been nice to hear it a week ago when you actually purchased it. So just jump on to the next task and celebrate, ideally when settlement's booked. I mean, if you can sort of try to just stay on it, that's the best thing because even after formal loan approval, it's much faster nowadays with digital loan docs to sign. It used to be all paper and you get mailed out and you have to sign it and, sometimes they get lost, and it was quite stressful sometimes just because of the bank's archaic processes. But yeah, hopefully, you can sometimes get settlement booked, weeks and weeks in advance of your settlement and that really takes the stress off.
Yeah, and I think, again, that whole theme of getting prepared early, and your broker should be talking through the next steps as well. If you're just before making offers, they should be talking about, well, these are the next steps that are going to happen, and getting you prepared so you know once that offer is accepted, okay, these are my next steps that I need to do as a buyer. So it's all about getting prepared, and that's a big takeaway from today's episode is being prepared early. It creates a calm and confident end to your home buying journey. And remember that your conveyancer and your broker are working behind the scenes to make sure everything settles smoothly. So if you want help navigating this final stage, we've created a settlement ready guide, and that walks you through everything we've talked about today and step by step from formal approval all the way through to settlement. You can download it at firsthomeunlocked.com.au, or you can use the link in the show notes. So that's it for episode 8, and that's a wrap on the buying process. So over the last 8 episodes, we've walked you through every step from building your vision, deposits, pre-approval, looking at asset quality, all the way through to getting your keys at settlement day. And we really hope this series has helped you feel more informed, more empowered, and more confident and ready to unlock your first home with clarity and confidence. But we're not stopping here. In the coming episodes, we'll be diving deeper into all things first home buyers need to know. So from how the banks look at your ability to service a loan to government schemes and plenty more. If you haven't already hit follow, leave us a review and let us know what you'd like to hear more of. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you all next week. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you so much for listening. We'd really appreciate if you could do us a huge favour. Share this episode with any first home buyers that you know so we can help more people like you feel clear, calm and confident when purchasing their first property. You can join our Facebook group, First Home Unlocked, to continue the conversation with other first home buyers. Or if you're ready to unlock your first home, you can book a get to know you chat by using the link in the show notes or by going to firsthomeunlocked.com.au. Before we go, just a reminder that everything we share on this podcast is general in nature and not tailored to your personal situation. We always recommend seeking advice from a qualified and experienced professional when making financial decisions.